Hello, I'm Tyrone McKinley Freeman. I'm the author of Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow, published by the University of Illinois Press. Thank you so much for taking time to stop by and visit with me to learn more about this book. I really appreciate your time and interest. Madam C.J. Walker is a very important historical figure in American history. And in this book, I wanted to tell a part of her life that hasn't received a lot of attention. She was born in 1867, right after the Civil War and the beginnings of emancipation. And by the time she died at the end of World War I in 1919, she had become a millionaire who had built a beauty culture company that literally became an empire, selling products all across the country and even overseas. And in the process, she did a lot to help Black women and African Americans fight against the scourge of Jim Crow's racism and sexism. And so in this story, I'm trying to share how her generosity unfolded across her lifetime. We usually think about philanthropy as something that only the richest people among us do, and they usually do it after they spend their lives accumulating wealth and then start focusing on issues of importance to them and to society later in old age. Well, Madam Walker flipped that. She was generous from pretty much from the beginning, even though she really had very little, but she was generous with what she had. And so I think it offers an important story, a deeper way of understanding her as an American figure, and also a way of understanding African Americans as philanthropists, which again is not something that's widely covered in the media or part of our imagination when we think of who are the top philanthropists of any given historical era. And so today, I want to share with you a brief excerpt from the book. It's from the third chapter entitled Education. And I should tell you that each chapter in the book is named for a particular kind of gift that Madam Walker gave to help others. The education chapter is about how she built a network of schools to provide education for African Americans as an alternative, again, amid Jim Crow's racism and sexism at the turn of the 20th century. So let's get started. And I should say in this excerpt, the very influential and powerful political leader Booker T. Washington makes an appearance. On Friday, August 23rd, 1912, Madam C.J. Walker, now a wealthy 45-year-old African-American manufacturer of beauty care products, stood before an audience of approximately 2,000 that had filled a church on the south side of Chicago, Illinois, to participate in Booker T. Washington's 13th annual meeting of the National Negro Business League. Washington, the prominent Black leader and advocate for Black industrial education, had organized the group 12 years earlier to serve as a network for promoting Black economic development in Jim Crow America. It quickly became popular and well attended by Black business owners and professionals from across the country. Washington stood close to Walker that day, but he was chagrined because she was not a scheduled speaker. After months of trying to get Washington's attention through letters and recommendations made on her behalf by mutual friends, Walker was fed up with Washington's inattention and refusal to put her on his program. So she commandeered the floor from him and demanded to speak. Madam Walker wanted to share her story and gain Washington's respect and endorsement. Her company was growing. She had overcome much and wanted to help other Black women conquer similar obstacles. She had a clear strategy for doing so through her company. She believed she was an entrepreneur deserving of respect with as much to share, if not more, as the packed slate of speakers who had dominated the meeting for nearly 3 days. She admired and identified with Booker T. Washington, who had made it out of slavery to become a national leader, and she viewed her own life as having a similar ascending trajectory. At this point, she could endure his slights no more. Walker's disruption of the program began with her own defiant declaration, quote, "Surely you're not going to close the door in my face," end quote, as she got up from her seat and walked to the front near a stunned Washington. She proceeded to outline the case to the audience for her speaking by highlighting her struggles as a poor washerwoman, the legitimacy of the beauty culture industry in her business, the size of her staff and her physical plant, her income, and the accoutrements of her success, such as her 2 automobiles. The crowd interrupted Walker's speech with great applause, but she urged them to stop so she could continue, not knowing how much Washington could stand before cutting her off. For the climax of the presentation, Walker left the audience with a particular statement with great implications for the history of Black education and Black women's philanthropy. Quote, "Perhaps many of you have heard of the real ambition of my life, the all-absorbing idea which I hope to accomplish. And when you have heard what it is, I hope you will catch the inspiration, grasp the opportunity to do something of far-reaching importance, and lend me your support. My ambition is to build an industrial school in Africa. By the help of God and the cooperation of my people in this country, I am going to build a Tuskegee Institute in Africa." End quote. The audience applauded loudly as Walker resumed her seat. They loved her idea and her overall message. Washington tried to recover quickly by moving on to the next agenda item with little acknowledgement of Walker's presentation. But she had had her moment. Her impromptu and forceful speech has been used by scholars to document her legacy as a Black female entrepreneur, but not so much as a philanthropist, educator, and supporter of industrial education. This model of education focused on the teaching and learning of basic agricultural trade skills to promote the dignity of labor as a pathway to economic and then political empowerment for African Americans after emancipation. At the time, Washington's conceptualization of industrial education was lauded by white Northern industrial philanthropists such as Andrew Carnegie, who promulgated it across the South through a significant investment of their resources, which was vehemently critiqued by people like W.E.B. Du Bois, William Monroe Trotter, the Black press, and many others as being detrimental to the race. As a result of these tensions, historians over the past 40 years have been very critical of Washington and his motives, his model, and institution as not serving the interests of Black people. Yet, here was this independent Black woman using her voice to advance the contentious philosophy too, as part of her gospel of giving. Walker's direct engagement with industrial education started well before she made her speech at the NNBL meeting, and will continue to play out for years to come. Her dream of building a Tuskegee Institute in Africa represented not only her wholehearted embrace of Washington's controversial educational philosophy, but perhaps one of the most significant philanthropic gifts she gave to others: education. Throughout history, African Americans have pursued education as a prime aspiration. As a resource that had been both denied and pursued, education represented a linchpin for securing hope for individuals and freedom for the race. During slavery, the cultural and operating practices of Southern plantations and the legal statutes of many Southern states prohibited providing even the bare rudiments of literacy for enslaved people, let alone formal schooling. But under secrecy and the constant threat of punishment, many enslaved people aggressively developed their literacy. This impulse for learning expanded after emancipation. African American efforts to establish free communities especially emphasized education and the creation of schools. Booker T. Washington's early observation of the formerly enslaved people's fervor for literacy after emancipation informed his own desire to create Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. He wrote, quote, "It was a whole race trying to go to school. Few were too young and none were too old to make the attempt to learn. As fast as any kind of teachers could be secured, not only were day schools filled, but night schools as well. The great ambition of older people was to try to learn to read the Bible before they died. With this end in view, men and women who were 50 or 75 years old would often be found in night school. Sunday schools were formed soon after freedom, but the principal book studied in Sunday school was the spelling book. Day school, night school, Sunday school were always crowded, and often many had to be turned away for want of room." End quote. The demise of slavery and the rise of Reconstruction may have done away with laws against educating Blacks, but African Americans still had to engage in a long-suffering struggle to assert their freedom and control their own lives. An ideological system of second-class education emerged for them through the efforts of Southern white-led governments and Northern white industrial philanthropists who sought to maintain the status quo of Black racial oppression. In spite of such opposition, educational historian James Anderson observed that Blacks created a unique system of public and private education in the decades after emancipation because they viewed literacy and formal education as means to liberation and freedom. Because the legally sanctioned denial of education was foundational to slavery and Jim Crow, it has been both a principal object of and instrument for Black women's philanthropy, engaging in philanthropy. As an objective, education motivated the voluntary actions of Black women who were especially adept at educating children, women, families through their schools, benevolent associations, clubs, fraternal orders, literary societies, normal and industrial schools. The provision of education for the masses was a goal of their philanthropy. They raised funds and ran educational programs. But education itself is a form of philanthropy. The process of teaching and learning is a melioristic act, one that supports participants in acquiring, creating, and using new knowledge, skills, and dispositions, philanthropic gifts, that can dramatically change their relationship to the broader world. The view of education as philanthropy has been elemental in Black women's philanthropy. When Black club women at the beginning of the 20th century set up their educational programs, they were not just providing education as a service. They were using teaching and learning itself to change minds, lives, and conditions for African Americans through literacy, child rearing, hygiene, and other academic and vocational subjects they deemed important for freedom. When Black women teachers, who held positions of esteem in their communities because of the premium placed on education, worked in under-resourced and dilapidated Jim Crow schools, they mentored their students and engaged in community work above and beyond the expectations of their paid positions, because education itself was viewed as an important instrument for uplifting the race. In these ways and more, educating others not only marked a significant aim of Black women's philanthropy, it was a philanthropic act itself. The gift of education supported the definition of African American philanthropy and expanded Madam C.J. Walker's gospel of giving. And again, that's from the opening of chapter 3, entitled Education, from Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow. I thank you so much for taking time to stop by and to listen. And I invite you to pick up the book to learn more about what happened to Madam Walker's school in Africa. Was she able to build it in 1912? It's an interesting story. And it also connects to a more recent event because Oprah Winfrey built a school in Africa in 2007. So I invite you to pick up the book and learn more about that story, about this incredible woman who had such a great impact on our country more than 100 years ago, and whose legacy is alive and well today. Thank you very much.